Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. I'm Supervisor Malia Cohen, chair of this committee. And to my left is Supervisor Jane Kim. Supervisor Scott Weiner is in the budget meeting and will pop over later on in this committee session. Our clerk is Miss Andrea Osbury. I also want to recognize Jesse Larson as well as Jennifer Lowe at SFGov TV who are helping us with this broadcasting. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements today?
Yes, please silence all electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the June 30th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. I'd like you to call items 1 and 2 together.
Okay. Item number 1 is an ordinance amending the planning code to acknowledge approval of Rincon Hill Streetscapes Master Plan. And item number 2 is an ordinance amending the Rincon Hill Area Plan of a subsection of the general plan.
Sure. Supervisor Kim is the maker of this item, and after Supervisor Kim gives opening remarks, we'll hear from Paul Chasen from the Planning Department to present on these two items. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you. And actually, I think I still need to add my name to items number 1 and 2 as a sponsor. But I would like to make some opening comments. As many of you know, the Rincon Hill Area Plan was adopted back in 2005. It was the first major area plan adopted by the Planning Department since the 1990s downtown and South of Market plans. In response to the changing economy, Rincon Hill was rezoned from a formerly industrial area to a mixed-use residential area that we see today, with actually a growing number of residents. Streetscape and traffic changes were an integral part of the planning process to plan for new residents and new workers that were going to be coming to this neighborhood. The area, while rezoned residential, is at the base of the Bay Bridge with surrounding streets as regional traffic ways. Traffic and pedestrian safety continue to be an important priority as this residential population grows, and commuter traffic from the city's growing number of businesses and jobs increase as well. Former industrial street patterns provide an opportunity to redesign streets to become more pedestrian in scale, and of course, to help us come in line with our Vision Zero policy, reducing traffic fatalities here in San Francisco, a huge issue for this neighborhood. The Rincon Hill Streetscape Master Plan images streets in and around Rincon Hill as an important part of the city's open space in a dense urban environment with limited opportunities for parks. Key components of the plan include living streets on Spear, Main, and Beale, a focus on Harrison Street for traffic calming and street widening, some of the most narrow sidewalks that we see here in San Francisco, as it was a formerly industrial manufacturing corridor. Folsom Street to be the neighborhood-centered east-west connection from the waterfront all the way through Western Soma into the Mission, and improve pedestrian conditions at freeway ramps. We also are working in conjunction to make sure there's a seamless relationship to the growing new Transbay redevelopment area plan and the Transbay terminal, and want to invite Paul Chasen from the Planning Department to present the plan in more detail.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Kim. Thank you. Thanks for having me this afternoon, supervisors. So I'm Paul Chasen from the Planning Department. I'm going to give you a brief presentation on the plan, if I can have the screen on the laptop. And so I don't really need to go through the summary because Supervisor Kim so eloquently just summarized it, but this plan is being, I think the key thing here is that the plan is being kind of in process for a long, long time, and we're glad to be adopting it today finally. To some more recent legislative items that happened. The plan was initially approved by the MTA board through the Rincon Hill Area Plan adoption in 2006. This recently, last month, we took it to the MTA board to make some legislative tweaks to kind of update it. We also, the planning has been through the Planning Commission. The two items before you have been through the Planning Commission, initiated on March 5th and adopted unanimously on March 26th. We had a lot of letters of support, I think around 30 or so, for the two items. And then I just want to say that the two things that you're actually doing today, you're making the planning code currently has some language saying, if the plan is adopted, because there was a draft written for a while, it's been a draft status. If the plan is adopted, just implement the plan. If it's not adopted, work with the planning department to implement the draft vision sort of that they've got going. And we're just tightening that up to say implement the Rincon Hill Streetscape Plan. And there's a policy in the area plan, which is a component of the general plan, that says create a Rincon Hill Streetscape Plan. We're amending that to say implement the Rincon Hill Streetscape Plan. pretty straightforward. So just some background and context. Like Supervisor Kim just mentioned, this plan is kind of there's sort of two plan areas that abut next to each other. There's the Rincon Hill area, which is outlined in blue, and then just to the north of it, along Folsom Street, is the Transbay redevelopment area. And because a lot of the north side of Folsom and then moving up between Main and Beale towards Market Street used to be these parcels that were the Embarcadero Freeway. It made sense to redevelop those parcels through a different planning process. By doing them as a redevelopment project, or we had more tools to extract more public benefits like affordable housing. And so for this kind of technical policy reason, the neighborhood was divided into two planning areas. However, when we've done the planning for Rincon Hill and Transbay, we really try to integrate these as one seamless neighborhood. So like Folsom Street acts as the central street, kind of like the Valencia Street or the commercial spine. The north-south streets, we have design guidelines both in the Rincon Hill process and the Transbay process that sort of will make them feel like one seamless, integrated sort of series of spaces. So these are the streets that are in Rincon. The red dashed lines are actually in the Transbay area. The colors are a little different on the screen, but this purple line over here is Harrison Street. North is kind of Market Street is to the top of the drawing. Folsom Street is going to be redone by the redevelopment agency, or by Office of Community Infrastructure and Investment, and the entity formerly known as the redevelopment agency. The living streets that are Main, Beale, and Spear are those green streets. They have very generous sidewalks, and part of the intent behind that is to show that they can sort of double as open space. And then Fremont and First Streets kind of are accessing the freeway, so they're kind of more a balance between pedestrians and automobile traffic. Some of the alleys are these kind of the light green streets are more residential and open space like in character. So just to walk you really briefly through, you can sort of see Harrison Street, the typical features in the plan, including these very generous bulb outs that are in the plan. And on the living streets where you have a 30-foot sidewalk, those bulb outs almost become like a pedestrian plaza. Here's an example of some of the living streets, and they're sort of intended to function as open space because there wasn't a lot of open space in the neighborhood, so these wide sidewalks enable us to create these kind of open space pods, these kind of generous little nooks that are sort of programmed for activities like sitting and walking your dog and so forth. And then the freeway access streets, Fremont and First Street, that sort of are similar to the Better Streets Plan standards, our basic standards for a walkable sort of space, except the bulb outs are more generous, and we have on them. And then Guy Place and Lansing Street, some of the residential alleys, and Lansing Street, which is moving forward as a shared street. Here's a sneak peek of the design. We're really excited about this. We've worked very closely with a number of city departments to kind of advance the design of shared streets in the city that'll hopefully set a precedent to allow some of these projects to move forward. I want to also just thank Supervisor Kim for her leadership and help in moving this project forward. This map's a little washed out. I apologize. This is a map of where the bulb outs are in the plan. Since the plan was initially adopted, there used to be a bus line on Harrison Street, which has sort of been removed. It was using the parking lane as a transit-only lane during the PM peak. So MTA has taken away that bus line, and we've added bulb outs to the north side. That's the tweak that MTA board sort of recently approved. And then the bulb outs themselves are bigger than the standard city bulb out, and they also have space for greenery or bike racks or some street furniture. The plan gets into some details around sort of planting materials, street furniture, street trees that are sort of called out specifically for different streets. And then just in general, we're seeing a lot of development coming forward. This is our pipeline map. I apologize, the legend is off the map, but the pink projects are projects that are active, and the purple projects are ones that are already done. The light pink ones are projects that are coming into play, and some of those are out of date. Number 11, for example, is moving forward, as is number 12. And so it's really important that we adopt this plan because it gives us an important tool to work with developers to make sure we get the public realm that they're sort of required to do. And then just briefly on there's impact fees that fund a lot of this infrastructure that goes through a sort of the EPIC process, which is done through the city's sort of capital planning process. Annually, it's updated based on the projected revenues. So here's the funds that we have in the process right now. Some of the past funded projects were Guy Place Park. We're going to be funding Harrison Street through this project and a mid-block pedestrian pathway. And so here's a photo of Guy Place Park. and some of the streets that have already been funded through the impact fees. Just sneak peek, Folsom Street is not in the Rincon Hill plan area, but it is next door. And like I was saying, we work very closely. So I just want to give you a sneak peek of what's coming to Folsom Street. Folsom Street was initially conceived as going to be a 4-lane street, but because of Vision Zero and some of those goals, we've been able to convert it to a cycle track. So you can sort of see initially it was going to be then become a 3-lane street with a cycle track, and now the new design calls for a 2-lane street and a cycle track, which is going to make a much safer pedestrian environment. It's going to be a really high-quality space, and we've been working closely with our colleagues at OCII to deliver that. And that is the summary of what's in the plan. So if you have any questions, I just want to thank you for your consideration of this.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you for the presentation, and I would also love to get a copy, electronic version of it. I just had 2 questions. One was on what you had brought up with the additional bulb outs on Harrison Street, which I'm very excited about with the rerouting of the 12th Folsom. This is a question I had reading the planning memo. So I'm curious, I know that Folsom going eastbound currently turns and goes towards Chinatown. I guess I'm curious about the change from Harrison Street. I didn't understand what that change, the exact change was.
Oh, yeah. So can I get the computer back? So to answer your first questions about the bulbs, basically the city has impact fee money rolling in, and we've decided we've prioritized Harrison Street based on the community feedback as the highest priority. Part of that is because you can sort of see in the upper right, it touches all the streets in the neighborhood. It's an important circulation street. It's also a Vision Zero street, which we know is an important
Absolutely.
thing. And then the other thing is what it does is we're going to build Harrison Street and we're going to build the bulb outs to the future dimensions. So, for example, you can see, I think, an image here of Harrison and Spear, and you'll notice on the left side of the image, there's a much wider sidewalk. It's like the right side has a 15-foot sidewalk, the left side has like a 30-foot sidewalk. And so when we build the bulb out, we'll build the curb line to the 30-foot sidewalk and then return it to either to what it is now. And so in doing that, we can reduce the cost of these other streets a lot, but also really close up these intersections and make them much, much safer as a pedestrian safety sort of thing. To answer your other question, the MTA used to run a bus on Harrison Street and Folsom. The bus ran as a couplet. And it had, because of the freeway,
Both one eastbound, one westbound?
It was the bus would, I think, because it was before I worked at the city, so I apologize for my ignorance, but basically there was a PM peak transit only lane. The afternoon traffic getting on the Bay Bridge would slow down the bus, and so the parking would disappear, and there was a bus only lane there. MTA then removed the bus, I think, during budget cuts. They're now adding the bus back, and we've worked closely with them in designing this and to make sure that the bulbs aren't going to interfere with the future transit operations. But essentially, because there was a bus-only lane there, we couldn't have bulb outs when the plan was originally written because the bus would crash into the bulb out and that would make trouble. But now that the bus has been removed from the stretch of Harrison, we were able to add bulb outs to the north side of the street over here.
And this is just east of 2nd Street, right? The
Yes.
bulb outs? And I only ask this question because our residents have a very legitimate concern, a big concern that they have expressed to SFMTA, which is that none of the east-west buses in the south of Market go past 2nd Street. And so they have a lot of concerns, and they've been pushing MTA to actually push the buses to go more east to really meet the needs of the Rincon Hill neighbors, because there aren't really any buses in that area. And so I'm curious about whether the bulb outs will
get in the way of the future.
Get in the way of that advocacy work.
Maybe I should have articulated it better. So MTA took away the bus during the budget cuts, and then the neighbors are understandably upset because there's no transit and we're adding all this dense housing. And so we've worked with them on the new bus, where the new bus is going to go, and they're putting a bus back. And so we've made sure that the bulbs that we're putting in here are going to work with the bus.
Great.
Part of the answer to that is that because Folsom Street is becoming two-way, and because Folsom Street also has a lot of housing on it, especially a lot of affordable housing, which is a more transit-dependent community, it's also a flatter street. It makes more sense. The bus is going to be two-way on Folsom Street.
Right.
For the
So if the
stretch.
buses can go two-way on Folsom Street, which I know we're still working through
Yeah.
in the Central Soma plan to see if we can fit a two-way Folsom Street, because I know there's also conversations about it being a Howard and Folsom Street one-way diet as
Yeah.
well. I think that would rectify or take care of that need.
Yeah, and that
Harrison isn't the only corridor that a bus needs to go down. I just want to make sure that the bulb outs don't, kind of wipe out the possibility of a bus being on that corridor if we need it to be.
Well, on the east of Folsom, it's still an open table, and the central SOMA plan will sort of determine whether
Right.
bus is on that stretch. West of Folsom, it's being decided that MTA sort of decided that they want the bus there, both two-way on that stretch. And we actually have amended the Folsom design to include transit islands to accommodate bus stops on that
Okay.
street. So it shouldn't be a
Okay.
problem in Rincon Hill.
And I just want to also clarify, I very much support the bulb outs on Harrison. Harrison Street is probably one of the unfriendliest corridors for a pedestrian to walk down. I mean, literally, you have to walk single file down those sidewalks as they were formerly industrial. So I'm glad to see that we're doing the widening there and the bulb outs.
Well, and one final, I know we should probably move on, but like one final thing on that is that Harrison Street is not going to be built until Folsom is done because for construction impacts, we don't want to shut down the two main streets in the neighborhood. And so if for whatever reason there was a change decision, there's plenty of time to revisit that. So in adopting this plan, we're not locking this in stone. We're setting a policy, but the details can be worked out later around whether if the MTA wants a removable, for example, to accommodate a bus.
And what is the timeline for the Folsom Street streetscaping for the Rincon Hill portion?
So Folsom Street, it's technically in the redevelopment or the OCII's plan area, and so the timeline is something that planning department has very little control over. But the goal is to have start construction in 2016, I believe, and then it should be done in 2017, and then Harrison Street would start.
In mid-2017?
Something like that. Yeah, basically Harrison will start when Folsom is done. So assuming Folsom finishes on time, then Harrison's going to start.
Okay. I know the neighborhood would like to see that occur as soon as possible. And I just want to reiterate my support for utilizing the IFD, the Infrastructure Financing District, which the Board of Supervisors approved back in 2011 to ensure that we were able to utilize some of that tax increment to help fund some of the gaps for the open space and the streetscaping work that we really need to provide for this really growing neighborhood. My second question is a small one. It was actually asked at the last community meeting at South Beach Harbor. There was a concern about placing trees between parking spots as a way of widening sidewalks on Guy Place.
Yeah, if I could get the laptop again, it might be helpful to kind of. So the
concern was that the city has never done this before. I believe we have, but I just wanted to clarify that.
The city has done this before. I have one example that on Chenery Street in Glen Park has parking streets in the parking lane. And this was the image from the original plan. The original plan was written before the Better Streets plan, so there was no shared street. When we updated it, we added a shared street, but the original plan always called for trees in the parking lane. So all we did is sort of lift up the curb when we updated the plan, but there's a precedent in Glen Park. There's also a precedent in the Better Streets plan itself, which was adopted by the board, I think in 2007-ish. I apologize, I don't have the exact date, but that has a whole typology, and it calls for street trees in the parking lane as a strategy, as a toolkit in the city's toolkit for designing streets.
Yeah, on an aesthetic level, I really like it. The concern that was raised was, that the trees would get hit a lot, and, how would we protect them with the cars parking in between? And I think the second was, again, I don't have the answer to this, but whether the roots would come up above the sidewalk and impact the parking.
So I can try and take a stab at those two. Between the cars, you can kind of see this bar over here. That's kind of a wheel stop. And then on the other side, there's this little dot right there. That sort of square thing is a bollard, which kind of protects the trees.
Okay.
This parking spaces are a little more generous than a normal parking space, so the cars can get in and out. And then the final thing that's really important to know about Lansing Street is that when the 45 Lansing project, which is kind of this parcel right here off the bottom of the map, went through the Planning Commission, because they're this big skyscraper on this postage stamp parcel, they couldn't meet their open space requirements. So the Planning Commission required them in their conditions of approval to build Lansing Street and maintain it in perpetuity. So if, for example, a car would bump into a tree and hurt the tree, or the roots came up and started breaking up the sidewalk, the development, 45 Lansing, is responsible to maintain it. So they're actually removing that maintenance responsibility from the property owners, the other property owners on Lansing Street, and they're assuming it in perpetuity.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is that it?
That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chanson. Chason. Thank you. I'd like to now go to public comment. Public comment is open at this time. If there's any member of the public that'd like to speak on this item, please come forward. Seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Kim, do you have any last remarks?
Yeah, I just want to thank the planning department for all of their work on this. This is, again, a neighborhood that will support 10,000 residents, and so it's really important that we create a complete neighborhood. And I think, we can't wait soon enough for these improvements to go in, both for open space and the streetscaping, so that we can encourage our residents to walk safely and really build this healthy neighborhood that we want to see. So thank you for that. I know that there were a lot of delays along the plan, partially due to the recession over the last couple of years, but it is really amazing to see all the development and construction that's occurring in this neighborhood now. Very painful for the existing residents, but in the long term, I really hope that we're able to build this great neighborhood. So ask for your support, and so I'll make a motion to move forward item number 1 and number 2 with positive recommendation.
Okay, motion made by Supervisor Kim. Excuse me. Could we do a roll call vote? Thank you.
A roll call vote on item number 1 of Supervisor Kim.
Aye.
So I'm sorry, it's a microphone. Supervisor Kim, aye. Supervisor Wiener is absent, and Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Aye. You have 2 ayes.
Thank you. This motion passes with positive
And
recommendation.
on item number 2, Supervisor Kim. Aye. Kim, aye, and Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
You have 2 ayes on item number 2 also.
Thank you very much. Both motions pass. Could you please call item 3?
Item number 3 is a hearing on Trans-Bay Transit Center and Downtown Extension platform compatibility.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Kim is the primary sponsor of this hearing, so would you like to make some opening remarks? Great. Thank you.
So this is a continuation of an item that we first heard in December of last year at the Land Use Committee, and it is discussion on Caltrain and high-speed rails, compatible boarding platforms. And I know this is a very important issue to multiple counties, an imperative issue to solve, particularly in light of the operational flexibility of the Trans-Bay Terminal, which will be the northernmost terminus for both high-speed rail and Caltrain. Really glad that we're able to have this continued discussion today. I know there's been a number of meetings since our last hearing in December, both between Caltrain, TJPA, and High Speed Rail, to discuss how we can address the needs of different systems, both in terms of what they would like to see in their vehicular fleet, as well as their needs around boarding platform. Before Caltrain went out with its RFP, we know the number 1 priority for Caltrain is electrification, which is incredibly important. As you are hitting already over capacity and will continue to grow in ridership, electrification will be a key part in making sure that we are getting our trains in and through the peninsula faster, and that we'll be able to also board more individuals, encouraging a healthier Bay Area. Caltrain has done extensive research on the cost and benefit of a uniform platform height, surveying both car manufacturers and their operations staff on car design at various platform heights. And the initial research from Caltrain staff shows that the platform compatibility is feasible, but of course presents a series of trade-offs. Last Friday at the Trans-Bay Joint Powers Authority meeting, of which I sit on, the board voted to adopt a resolution to encourage high-speed rail and Caltrain to reach an agreement that allow for compatible platforms for both train systems so that they could use the Trans-Bay Transit Center's 3 different platforms. And of course, we have constraints both here in San Francisco as well as I imagine in Millbrae, where we're limited in land, and so we can't just build more tracks. I know that that's something that may be an option in San Jose with the Ghirardelli station, but it's really important that as we build here with our limited land supply, that we're able to come to an agreement that ensures platform compatibility. So I did want to invite today to discuss this further is Casey Fromson and David Couch from Caltrain. We do also have Luis Zernaga from SFCTA here as well, and I do see members of the planning department as well.
PowerPoint. Hi, while that's getting loaded, thank you so much for having us here today. As Supervisor Kim said, we were back here in December of last year, and since that time we've been doing a lot of work with High Speed Rail to work on this issue, because we did hear from a lot of stakeholders that this was an important issue to explore to see if there was a way to have Caltrain's new electric vehicles not preclude future compatible boarding height with high-speed rail. So we've gone through a 6-month process, and we owed it to this committee along with the other committees we've been meeting with on a regular basis to report back on what the progress was so everyone could see where we've been moving forward on this process, and then having the Caltrain board make a policy decision next month on this topic.
Thank you.
So without having the PowerPoint here, I can just verbally talk about the issue. I assumed it would have been on here already, but I can get a stick real fast.
Do you also have copies of the presentation for the committee?
I apologize, I don't. Last time, I thought the committee took care of that, so I had emailed it in last week.
Yeah, usually.
We bring copies.
Yeah, but maybe we can see if we can get them printed from the clerk's office.
Yeah, let me see. I don't think I received them. So hold on a second.
You said you emailed it
I did email it last week.
to.
It was who was coordinating with this group, and so I thought it was.
So why don't we
Andrew,
just go ahead
actually.
and continue
Yeah.
with the presentation, and if the clerk's office are able to bring a copy over, they'll do so.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Thank you.
apologize for that. Okay, with that, I will go ahead and get started with this presentation, which is also available on the Caltrain website for members of the public. So we start with a few context slides to understand where we are with the system and where we're going in the future and why this decision is so important. The first one is the average weekday ridership, and you can see Caltrain has had a dramatic increase in the number of riders using the system. Since 2004, it's 143% increase, and that was really when the Baby Bullet was introduced and the Caltrain system became competitive with vehicles. As you can see from this slide, we are overseated capacity on both north and southbound. We highlighted the northbound slide here, and you can see in the low season it's up to 135%, and in the high season it's much higher than that. And the next slide shows this is what it looks like on the system with that type of capacity. And these pictures are not of Giants games where it's even higher than that. This is just a regular day on the system in both directions, which is pretty unique for a commuter rail. You can see that we have a variety of different customers riding the system, from people bringing on bikes to people going to and from work, and our ADA passengers. For the average rider, they are on the Caltrain system between 20 and 28 miles, and on there between 30 and 50 minutes. As you can see, when this compares to other systems in the Bay Area, for BART, Muni, and VTA, their passengers are on those systems for less time than they are for Caltrain. For ACE, it's a commuter rail system, and you can see they're even more. So Caltrain right now is a little bit in the middle for what the riders are experiencing and how long they're on the system. But when we look at the future for electrification, we have to keep in mind, will the system look a little bit more like BART and Muni and VTA, or is it going to look more like ACE and Capital Corridor and the commuter rails? So we have to balance that and understand the needs of our riders that are using our system. So our riders have told us a lot about their capacity, wants, and desires, and that Caltrain needs to expand to be able to have them use the system efficiently. But we've also heard from businesses as well. And the corridor that Caltrain runs on between San Francisco and San Jose has an incredible amount of economic support and vitality to the state. 14% of California's GDP, 52% of the patents, and 25% of the California state revenue come from this corridor. And because this corridor is so important for so many businesses, they created the Caltrain Commuter Coalition, which was formed last year. And the point of this coalition is really to advocate for Caltrain modernizing quicker, increasing that capacity, and working on the whole 101 corridor to see what can be done to alleviate that and make this a viable and sustainable economic environment. You can see a couple unique facts about Caltrain riders. 75% of the riders use the system to commute to work, and 60% are choice riders, which means they have access to a car but are choosing to ride Caltrain, so that as many people that would be clogging 101 and the other artilleries, but they're able to use Caltrain as an alternative and a good choice for them to get to and from work. So what Caltrain's been doing to address their needs is, first of all, do everything we can do now. So the first step, we bought used diesel trains, and you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, that's a picture of those trains. And we put them out in our system without even painting them because we knew we needed to get them out there quickly. So those are in operation now, and those are helping to alleviate some of the congestion that's on there today. But that's a short-term fix. What will be a much bigger step in the ability to increase capacity is Caltrain electrification, which is scheduled for 2020. With that in place, we'll be able to have more trains, serve more riders, increase station stops, and or reduce travel times.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I thought you were going to go on to the next slide. You can continue.
Okay. And then after that, and something that is also important that can work to increase capacity is level boarding and longer trains in the future. So those are things we're working towards.
Okay, let's go back to the last slide about just capacity. Supervisor Kim, one of the, you may or may not know, but I sit on the Joint Powers Board for Caltrain. And so I've heard this presentation before, and there's been a lot of discussion around capacity, seated capacity, standing capacity, what exactly and how we're defining capacity. So for the folks that are at home listening and just for Supervisor Kim's edification, could you talk a little bit about exactly how you're defining capacity?
Mm-hmm. With the Metrolink cars or overall?
Both.
So with the Metrolink cars,
and overall, both of them.
Right. So with the Metrolink cars, we've physically put more cars on our train. So we did have 5-car train consists, and when we added these diesel cars, we're able to make up 6-car train consists in the peak hour. So it's adding in more space. When we did that, we added more seated space, but we also added more space for bikes. There was a very large bike community level support saying that they wanted to have trains that are more consistent between our two different fleets. One fleet right now allows 80 bikes per train and one was 48. But as we're adding in these new diesel trains, we're able to take out some seats to add in more bike space and then also add in just more physical space because the trains are longer. Now, when we talk about electrification, and I can do it on this slide, and in a couple slides farther, I'll get into some more details on exactly those different elements. With electrification, we will be able to add more trains per hour per direction. So not only will they be 6-car trains, but we only have 5 in the peak hour today. With electrification, we'll be able to have 6. So for both standees, seats, and bikes, that will increase dramatically on the system. That exact ratio of seats to standees to bikes, we have a whole presentation on the staff recommendation for those elements, and I can talk about those a little bit, but for the broad terms, those are the key elements of how you get more capacity with electrification.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So this slide does point to the ridership and the increased frequency and quicker trips that we expect with electrification. These numbers came out of our EIR document, and it really shows that there are many different levels of benefits you get from electrification: the greenhouse gas reductions, the congestion, the noise relief, and then also the jobs that are created with it. So as Dave likes to say, it's a win-win-win project. This slide gets a little bit at that service benefits and trying to quantify for people how this increases capacity and how this changes. And so we took this from the perspective of the rider. Sometimes when we say more trains per hour per direction, that's confusing, but this is really getting down to what you see today. So with our diesel trains that aren't as high performance as the electric ones will be, we run 5 in the peak hour per peak direction, and in 60 minutes, it makes 5 or 6 stops. So that's going from San Francisco to San Jose. When we have electric trains, we'll have more trains per peak hour, and because they're able to stop and start quicker, they could go and make that same 5 or 6 stopping pattern in 45 minutes. Now, another way you could do it, because we have the capability now to use their performance in different ways, is that if we held that 60-minute time frame, which is very competitive to driving from San Francisco to San Jose in rush hour, today the train makes 6 stops. When we have the electric vehicles, it could make 13 stops. So if you're standing at a station like Redwood City and you get 3 trains coming through today, with the electrified system, you could have 5. So that'll mean a lot to you that you have more choices and are able to get on and off the system quicker. So it's not just one more train per hour, but it really is the performance difference that we can change the schedule and make some different schedules for people and hopefully make that more convenient. And with this, I'll run through a couple slides of where we've been for the details of the electrification project, and then I'll turn it over to Dave to talk about how our thought process has been modified based on stakeholder feedback, and then finish it off on what our staff recommendations are going forward. So the first one is just a recap of where we are. So we spent 2 years working on the environmental process for this project, and we got board certification at the beginning of 2015. We've issued a design-build contract for the RFP design-build contract, and so that's going to be the contract of people building the poles and wires to electrify the system, and we expect the board to award it in the fall of this year. On the EMU side, that's the electric trains, we do want the Caltrain board to issue an RFP in July, so next month, so we're able to have a contract award by the end of this year and keep in place that time frame of having electrified service by 2020. These are really important milestones to meet in order for us to get that big 2020 date, which is so important to our riders and business communities and our board members. This slide is just a recap of what I said from the last slide, provides a little bit more detail about the 6 pre-qualified teams and the time frame that we expect to award these contracts. So it's important for us to talk about our original plan because we want to be very transparent on what we were doing and then where we're modifying to. And we've been getting a lot of stakeholder feedback as we've gone around to public meetings over the last couple months, and we'll continue to do it this month to make sure that we are on the right path, and if we're not, that we're hearing from our stakeholders. So to recap of what we did on our original thinking plan was last summer, we went out to the car builders and we told them, this is what the system looks like today, and we're going to continue to have a ridership increase. This is how it looks and feels, but we also are going to have to share this corridor with high-speed rail in the future. So we need to be thoughtful about what our vehicles look like. And the car builders came back to us through a request for information process and said, if you want to maximize capacity, the best configuration is a bi-level train versus the single-level train that high-speed rail is interested in. Yes, they have previously made options. They can meet the U.S. regulation compliance. And for the most typical vehicle that's out there, you would board between 22 inches above top of rail and 25 inches. And there was adequate competition of car builders that were interested in bidding on this process. And this is what the vehicle would look like. It would serve our corridor today. It would be bi-level. There's several different internal levels for it, and the doors are at that roughly 25-inch level height. If you're an ADA passenger or carrying a bike on board, you take those couple steps in, and then you'd be at that bottom level. We'd continue to use the infrastructure that we have out there today. So this is the 2020 timeframe. The top left-hand corner shows that it's those two doors, so similar to part of our fleet that's out there today. You'd have a step to get in, the top right-hand corner, and then the bottom left-hand corner, those are mini highs, and the bottom right-hand corner are wayside lifts, and those are how our ADA passengers board our vehicles today, and that's how they would board the new EMUs in 2020. Now, as I've mentioned, future level boarding is very important to Caltrain. It's important for safety, operational efficiencies, passenger convenience, and ADA elements. And this is something that we do want in the future, and depending on which car we get, that future level boarding height will need to meet that. So in our original thinking, we would think for level boarding, Caltrain would have level boarding at the 25-inch level, and high-speed rail would also have level boarding, but at the 50-inch level. So we'd both have level boarding, and at the 2 to 3 stations that are shared by high-speed rail, there'd be dedicated platforms. Now, with any level boarding height, there's challenges. There's a lengthy construction period. With when you're having a revenue service, you're going to have to build those platforms, and Caltrain has 27 of them. There's also a California waiver that would be needed because we have freight on the corridor. And then we also have several different tenants that board the corridor, and they're at different heights as well. So ACE, Capital Corridor, and Amtrak all have different heights than Caltrain today, potentially Caltrain in the future, and high-speed rail. For station area impacts, we have 7 historic stations. There's different ramps. There's very different site-specific needs that all have to be taken into consideration for any level boarding height. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dave to do our thought process of how that's been modified for our thinking, and then I'll come back for the staff recommendation going forward.
Thank you, Casey. As we've gone forward in conversations with each one of the car builders, we're trying to take into account what the requests have been from many of the stakeholders. As Casey said a few minutes ago, the original process was for Caltrain to have a 25-inch boarding height and high-speed rail to be able to have 50-inch. So what was put in front of us was what could we do to get to that common boarding height of 50 inches? How could we modify the EMUs that we're about to purchase so that we could do that and have level boarding in the future? We started a 6-month process in conjunction with high-speed rail, and Ben Traposa sends his apologies today. He's in Sacramento and couldn't be here to go through this with us, but I want to assure you that we've been through this lockstep with high-speed rail. We interviewed car builders, went through a process to find out what they had, what their capabilities were. We did a technical analysis to make sure that there were not any critical flaws in anything that we were looking at. And then at the back end, we also went through to find out what it was that were going to be any constraints or issues on the operational side, because this is going to be a long-term effect over a 30-year plus time frame for each one of the vehicles. The car builders that participated, there were 7 of them. There were different options that were proposed as part of that process. One of them was to go ahead and add additional doors at the upper and lower level, and the other one was basically use something called traps, which would not result in a loss of seats, but it would limit the amount of doors that would be available for passengers to go ahead and come on and go off of the vehicles.
What is a trap? I'm sorry.
A trap is... Got one more picture? This is a trap right here. This is a picture of a SEPTA vehicle, which is on the East Coast. It's in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. If you look at the picture on the right, it's a single door that is at the end of the train, and there are a series of steps that come down so that you can get to that lower level platform. In the center is what that trap is. It's a plate that comes down and closes so that at that point when the plate is closed, that platform is at the 50-inch height. So you're using one door for multiple purposes. Mm-hmm. On the right, you're going down a set of steps to a lower platform, and in the center with that door, the trap closed, you're able to come out with a level boarding at that point.
I understand. So either you have one door that has a trap when you're at the higher platform, or you have 2 doors one at each different platform height?
Yeah, if you look at this view, if you're at a high-level platform, you would have 2 doors at each end of the vehicle for a total of 4, but they would be single doors. And when you're at the lower level, you're correct, there would only be 1 at each end of the vehicle. That's the right one. So those are the 2 different ones that we looked at. What we did find is that they could redesign an existing vehicle. What we didn't want to start with is a brand new vehicle that was a design from the wheels up. We believed that we could go ahead and hold delivery, which is what was confirmed from the manufacturers, in a 36-month time frame that would then support revenue service in late 2020. If we did go with a complete design of a vehicle, instead of 36 months to get the first vehicle, it would be about 5 years. So this allows us to be able to get something that has been used before and is proven and isn't something that is that new vehicle from the bottom up. We also found that there would be adequate competition from car manufacturers to be able to supply either of these 2 types. When we look at the operational assessment, and it was basically the 2 modification options that I went through a few minutes ago, and you have to take it and divide it into 2 different time frames. The first time frame is the 2020 time frame, which is when Caltrain would start operations and before high-speed rail. And then you also have to look at the future when high-speed rail is there and the platforms at the 50-inch level. What our focus areas were, looking at boarding with both bikes, without bikes, and also ADA accessibility. There's also issues depending upon what the configuration is with circulation inside of the vehicles. And then there are operational challenges and things that would have to occur, which principally relate to the things that are there related to the traps. To get us on the same page really with the terminology and the difference in levels, we currently have an 8-inch above top of rail platform that's common at all of the Caltrain stations. The low-floor vehicles, they come in a range of 22 to 25 inches above top of rail, but for sake of simplicity and keeping on common terms, we've stayed with 25-inch. There is an intermediate level, and that's the 50-inch level, which is basically over the top of the trucks or the wheel assembly for the vehicles. And then there's the upper level because of the fact that we get that extra capacity by using the bi-level vehicles. On the lower left is a double door, similar to what you saw earlier in the Bombardier fleet. And on the lower right is the single door, and that's going to be associated really with the traps when I get to that piece. As we start through and look at the 2020 timeframe, it is going to be a timeframe when we're going to have mixed fleets. We'll have the EMUs running, but we still are going to replace only 75% of the vehicles under this program, so we will continue to use the diesel fleet out and into the future. If I look specifically at modification A, this was the first one that basically put 2 sets of doors, 2 doors at the lower level, which was the original way that we had envisioned and planned for the vehicles, and then 2 at the upper level. What would occur in that situation is those 2 upper level doors would be installed at the time that the vehicle was manufactured. They would then be closed and not utilized until the point in time that the platforms were at the 50-inch level. That would occur once the first platform went to 50 inches, because at that point there would no longer be access from those lower level doors. As we start to look at that, it does give us the better ease of being able to get passengers and bikes on and off. We have to figure out where in this process the ADA facilities are, whether they're on the upper or lower level, and that will make a difference as we go ahead and move forward into the upper level platforms. To access those, we would have a combination. If it's the 25-inch platform, the mini blocks that we currently have in place at the stations could be used, or the lifts. If we went to the 50-inch level before the platforms were all at the 50-inch height, then we would go ahead and heighten those blocks, so we call them now maxi highs, and also be able to use the wayside lifts. This would give you an idea of what each one of those look like. On the top left, this is a picture from the East Coast. This is a high block that gives you that boarding height at the 50-inch level. The lower left is the existing mini-high kind of blocks that we have that are currently out on the system. In some cases, if we went to those higher blocks because of constraints on the platforms, we may be forced to go ahead and remove some of the mini-highs and then use what the picture is on the right, which is the lifts. We have those at some of the stations now, and depending upon configuration, we may have to use them at more. This is modification B. This is what I started through a few minutes ago with the traps at each end. The upper picture shows you the traps that would be at the far end of each car, and those are the three photos that are at the bottom, which show you the steps at the right side with the traps open, the center one with the trap being closed, and the third one with the trap door is on the left is basically with the trap in the up position and the door opened. So that's what you would have is 3 to 5 steps going up from that lower level to that 50-inch height. And that would be the way that we would go ahead and transition from the 8-inch height eventually to the point that all the platforms were at the 50-inch level. In modification B, which takes us to the point that we are going with the traps, and this is really a description of what I showed on the previous slide. It takes you into the fact that they are single doors. You've got the traps and the steps. This is maintenance intensive. Some that manufacturers have automatic traps. Some of them have manual traps. The ADA location at this point would be at the 50-inch level. And then you have a series of steps that you wind up going up and then down again to get to the lower level, which is where the bicycle parking area would be. By having the single doors instead of the double doors, it also causes an increase in dwell time. I don't have an exact number of what that would be. It's basically about half of the door leaves that we currently have. I wouldn't say that it's a doubling of the dwell time, but it is an increase in what the dwell time would be. When we go to the future and look at what the blended service would be with high-speed rail, with modifications to the stations, and in this case, it would be with scenario 1 that we have got 2 to 3 stations that have got that common platform height, the 50-inch with high-speed rail and Caltrain, and on the right, the 25-inch high platform at only the Caltrain stations. So this is a scenario that is not all of the platforms get raised to the 50-inch height. If you go to scenario 2, this is with common height 50-inch platforms for both high-speed rail and also for Caltrain at all of the stations in the peninsula. Moving to the future, what that means for modification A is you can see that if we go ahead and stay with 2 or 3 of the stations at the higher platform level, both the upper and lower doors would have to remain open to be able to serve both the 25-inch height and also the 50-inch height platforms. In scenario 2, which is the picture at the bottom, this shows that if we had all of the platforms at the 50-inch height with that common boarding, we would be able to go ahead and close those 2 lower doors, basically regaining seats.
I have a couple questions for you, Luis, and I'm not sure if I direct it towards you or towards Casey, but I wanted to know if Caltrain had the money for level boarding at any height.
No, there is currently nothing in the budget right now for any platform modifications, and there is nothing that was cleared in the environmental process for any changes to the platforms. As Casey said a few minutes ago, there also are a series of historic stations on the peninsula that could be challenging to being able to go ahead and make those platform changes.
And I also wanted to know if the disability community was consulted on some of these plans and with regards to the platform, if they have a preference or a comfortability level when it comes to getting on to these onto these trains?
The key is level boarding. That's what gets you the shorter dwell time. It's what gets you to the ability to not have customers go up and down stairs. That's always a safety issue. You don't want people to be tripping, getting off and on. Level boarding also gives you better access to be able to go ahead and get the bikes on, and also for ADA, so that you can go ahead and eliminate the use of those lifts and also the mini high or maxi high platforms.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. A follow-up question to the raising of the platforms. Regardless, Caltrain has to raise the platform to 25 inches, though. Is that correct?
That is the future plan, is to go ahead and go to the 25-inch level. The vehicles that we currently were planning on procuring
Are 25
could
inches.
be utilized with the 8-inch platform, and then at a later point in time, when the platforms went to 25 inches, you basically would put a filler in to cover that step, so that there would be the level boarding directly from the platform into the main body of the car. So there was a transition that could be made to go to that point.
And how would you do that from 8 inches to 25? Would it just be staircases that you would put into place and ramps?
Are you talking about the platform? Are you talking about
The platform itself.
On the platforms, that's what you would raise the existing 8 inches up to 25. So it would be basically a 18-inch difference.
No, I'm sorry, in the meantime. So you said you don't have funding currently to raise the platforms to 25 or 50.
Correct.
So what would you, but you said you can still use the 25-inch platform vehicles on the 8-inch platform, and how would you do that?
There's a set of steps that would go in.
Okay.
So you would use probably 2 steps to get into the vehicles. And what I was referring to is when you went to the 25-inch platform in the future, you would then put a filler piece in where that step was,
Right.
so that you'd be able to go ahead and do level boarding. That was the approach that was there in the beginning with Caltrain.
Do you anticipate a significant difference in cost between building a 25-inch or a 50-inch platform?
There will be a difference in cost. I will not say that it's a doubling of cost, but there will be a difference of cost. Part of the problem with some of the stations on the peninsula is they have been there for so long that whatever that foundation structure is, or whether there's anything that is earthquake resistance, those are all things that have to be taken into consideration. And whether we go to a 25 or a 50, a lot of it is going to depend upon what's there and what kind of structure has to be installed.
Thank you.
Please continue. Oh, SF Gov TV with the overhead. Thank you.
So that would allow, in modification, staying with this for just a second, what this does then with all platforms shared is you close the lower doors, which regains the seats. That shows you what that modification in scenario 1 does, and it's basically what I described in the previous slide. Modification B, and this goes back to the vehicles with the traps, at the point in time that you only had 2 or 3 stations that were at the upper level, you would continue to go ahead and use the traps at the point that you could go ahead and get access from either the 8-inch or the 25-inch platform. So you would have both of those sets of doors with the trap still active. If you went to the second scenario, which was shared boarding at the 50-inch level with the high-speed rail locations, then in essence what you would do is you would close off the bottom of those traps, seal the doors, so that you would then have 2 single-leaf doors at each end of the car to be able to have entrance and exit for any of the customers. That's a descriptor of what would occur as you went through that process to go ahead and seal the traps and some of the pieces that are there in terms of what the impacts are in terms of dwell time, challenges for passenger and bike circulation. Each one of these scenarios has its own pluses and minuses. Potential path forward, I'll let Casey come back up unless you have any other questions at this point.
We have no questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go through the next couple slides on a potential path forward, and then we have been meeting with lots of groups, including ADA groups, so I'm happy to talk about some of that feedback we received.
Thank you.
So for the potential path forward, we have to keep in mind the framework, which is making this all a little bit more complicated than I think anyone wants. But the blended system is not yet defined. There needs to be more community planning, more environmental evaluation to figure out exactly what it will look and feel like in the future. Right now, we have a conceptual idea of what the blended system is. But what we do have defined is the Early Investment Program, and it's actually called the High-Speed Rail Early Investment Program. That's the CBOS PTC system, or Advanced Signal System, and the electrification project. That is environmentally cleared, and we do have it defined. And what we have been asked to do is make a decision on our EMUs, our electric trains, so that it will not preclude a future common platform with high-speed rail. And so we are trying not to preclude a future that's not quite defined. So what staff is recommending is that we choose the car with more doors as the option. There are some challenges with that option. There is a seat loss when you have both sets of doors open, and some passenger circulation issues inside. As you saw, if you're a bike passenger or a passenger bringing a bike on board, you would board but then need to transition down steps internally. So there's some challenges there, but we think there's some short-term solutions that we can implement. First, we would ask the car builders to design this car with 2 sets of doors. We would keep the high doors sealed and only use the low doors initially. It would be similar to what the EMUs would look like and feel that we'd originally proposed, but we'd have that flexibility later to open them when we have further definition on the blended system, and we look at, does it make sense to have some car interior reconfigurations? At this point, we are asking High Speed Rail to fund those modifications so that we make sure we have this option in place to meet the blended system different futures that could be out there. And so when you do think about the blended system and what needs further definition, it's the service plan, system upgrades, if there's passing tracks, maintenance facilities, what each of those stations look like. We have plans from when the full build was proposed several years ago, but we don't have that detail of planning today. So there's more work that's needed to be done, and we don't need to make all of our decisions today. We need to keep it a future open so we're not precluding some different options in the future. So with our next steps, as I said, we've had many public meetings over the last couple months. We released a draft RFP to the car builders to confirm some of the information we heard from them when we had these internal conversations. We asked them a variety of questions, and we'll get those answers back later this month and be able to provide that information to our board. But we are going around to different groups with this proposed path forward and getting feedback on that. We have a separate presentation that deals with the internal configuration, the balance between seats, standees, bikes, and bathrooms. And we're happy to give that long presentation to this group as well if you want some more information. But for this topic, we know this was of great interest to this board, and so we wanted to come back to it. And our plan is to release an RFP in July to keep those milestones for the 2020 date. And we'll need to update our regional funding plan before we're able to go out with contracts, especially on the design build portion of that. And with that, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you. Supervisor Kim, do you have any questions?
I don't have questions. I was just going to make a few comments. It's really great to see the progress that has been made over the last 6 months. I know that this was a complex engineering issue, and it's nice to see that there is a solution moving forward. I think that, we will still continue to explore it. I think the lift and the ADA issue is probably what seems the most prominent to me with the bi-level boarding, and being that at the 50-inch, those that need wheelchairs or are unable to use the stairs are not going to be able to access, or are going to have a more difficult time accessing the seats on either level. That's probably one of the big issues that I see. But it's great to see some design engineering solutions to see how we can really take into account the needs of multiple systems on this one rail.
Thank you. I just have one comment. I think for Casey or Luis, it's just been my understanding that there is no money for level boarding, which makes a conversation very interesting with the high-speed rail administration. So how are those conversations going?
So it is true that right now there is no funding for level boarding. It's something that we desire in the future, and there's been some discussion that maybe there would be funding available through different sources, but there's been no firm commitments right now. And in order to release this RFP, we don't feel that we need to have those commitments in place. That really builds on what we're doing going forward, but there's no commitment from High Speed Rail right now to fund that.
Thank you, Ms. Casey. Okay, let's go ahead and take in public comment. If there's any members of the public that'd like to speak on item 3, please come forward. Just as a reminder, you'll have 2 minutes to speak. There'll be a soft bell.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Jim Lazarus, San Francisco Chamber of Commerce, was here last time when this subject came up, and I appreciate all the progress that it looks like has been made through the efforts of the city, High Speed Rail, and Caltrain. The bottom line, which really wasn't mentioned, is how do you accommodate different trains at the end of the line at the Trans-Bay Transit Center? And that's really the driving issue as far as we're concerned. If you remember the foot of Market Street, excuse me, in the early days of Muni Metro, with a stub end and not enough ability to move trains beyond the Embarcadero station. It was an operational disaster. And we believe that we need to make use of all available platforms at the Trans-Bay Terminal for all systems using the station. And that requires common level boarding. And we believe that this solution that was outlined to this committee today is appropriate, and the Chamber will, of course, be happy to work with the city, Caltrain, and High Speed Rail to make sure this solution is funded and that the project moves forward as quickly as possible. The worst thing that could happen, we believe, is an electrified Caltrain and a station. I mean, we have another problem, and that's obviously getting that tunnel built from 4th and King into the station. To have that beautiful station sitting there at 2020 without any trains would be a great disappointment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. SFGov-TV, there's an overhead.
Yes, I'll basically cover this when I close my remarks.
On the overhead projection, please.
Yeah, do you want to project this? This is the Trans-Bay Terminal. Okay, so I'll touch on this at the end. But what really happened here, I think, is very unfortunate because none of this conversation should ever have happened because everybody quietly forgot about the Federal, Railroad Administration, the FRA. And as you recall, last year, I basically said this is not a big deal. The High Speed Rail Authority just forgot to change their specifications when they adopted the blended system. And when I did further research, I found out that the FRA is following the exact same approach as Europe, and have made it very clear that high-speed rail must be compatible with Tier 1, which is absolutely everything that runs in North America, including Caltrain and obviously Canada. The HSR system's height and width must be compatible, and they don't talk about level boarding anywhere in there. What they're talking about is that they are looking at ADA strategies. But the thing I want to show you on closing, this is a Trans-Bay Terminal, and so basically the discussion about platform heights and all that stuff, it's outside this arena. It belongs, at the national level. You have two issues with the Trans-Bay Terminal as designed right now that both have to do with the second stream alignment. The first one is that it's impossible to have tail tracks. There is no room because you're pushing the tracks, all the way out to the other side. And the second is with the short Caltrain tracks, you will never ever be able to vacate the 4th and King storage. And the point with the tail tracks is, Supervisor Wiener, you brought it up at programming allocations on May the 13th. We need to be able to connect the other end of the Trans-Bay Terminal to the East Bay, and it'll be impossible to do with the second street alignment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this item?
First and foremost, if you allow us to print out cards, then our name should be read. So this committee, I'm putting this committee, I'm going to protest this, but I'm going to, because there must be a system. It's like yesterday, to bring up another point, somebody proposes something, but then conveniently leaves the chair and goes out. So having said that, there are people here selling snake oil. And we watch, the joint Trans-Bay Powers, we watch them and we see that these so-called experts, as the young lady, or I don't know how old she is, said, is just conceptual plans. So we can listen to the conceptual plans. My thing is, I've studied the trains in Europe, predominantly in France and in Germany. And I would say we need the experts from Japan, China, Germany and France and some other countries to come and really review these presentations, Mickey Mouse presentations. So this is a despicable committee. You better get your act together. If you allow us to fill out our cards, you better state our name, because this chair of this committee needs a lot of training. I know that. She says, oh, she's on some other committee. We don't want to hear about that. What San Franciscans want to hear is some hearing on this, the platforms, how some of the speakers have spoken, so that we have a hearing, so that the constituents of San Francisco have a real say. And that there must be a change of this committee, a very despicable committee. Thank you very much.
Anyone else like to speak in public comment? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed. Colleagues, is there any discussion on this body? No? Okay. Is there a motion for this, Supervisor Wiener? I don't know.
Move to continue to the call of the chair.
All right, that motion is moved to the call of the chair. Let's do a roll call vote on that.
We don't need
Excuse me?
Oh, look that.
You don't have to do it.
You don't
Okay.
need it. It was anonymous.
Thank you. Yes, that's right, without opposition. I think Supervisor Wiener, you had a motion that you
Yes.
wanted to put forward.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair, for accommodating my conflict today, because Budget Committee is ongoing now, and so I'm juggling the two. So I'd like to move to rescind the votes on items 1 and 2, and then make a motion to forward both to the full board with positive recommendation.
All right. Motion made by Wiener, seconded by Kim. By unanimous support, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, is there any other item before this body?
And there's no further business.
Thank you very much. This committee is in closed session. This committee is closed. Thank you.